afraid of the dark.
Hello, my listeners. Today I'm going to tell two stories about former investigators recalling mystical cases that stumped them. Ghost Axe story by a colonel of justice, criminalist, now doctor of law. This story took place in the early 2000s. On January 3rd, my partner, Victor Joseph, a duty criminalist investigator for the investigative division of the city prosecutor's office, and I began our 24-hour shift. It was a routine shift, with a couple of domestic homicide calls where our assistance wasn't needed as the local investigators had things well in hand. Around 4:30 p.m., the direct line with the city dispatch rang. A patrol officer from the transit police had noticed a bloody man on the commuter train. At first, they assumed he was drunk and had cut himself, but it quickly became apparent that he had no wounds, and the blood wasn't his. The man was clearly disoriented, not drunk, but sluggish and answering questions incoherently. It smelled like murder. The detainee couldn't give his name. He tried. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The officers searched him and found what looked like either a passport or a military ID in his pocket. They ran his info and found out he lived in a part of town where there were still some private homes. The responding unit reported that the house was locked with a padlock and there were blood stains on the porch. They broke in and found a body of a woman with multiple chop wounds to the head and body, as the report would later describe. My partner and I were soon dispatched to assist the local specialists at the crime scene. We arrived about an hour and a half after the initial call, but it turned out they had done most of the work without us. About 40 minutes later, we received another call. This time it was an attack on armored truck guards in another part of the city. 2 dead, 1 injured, and $1.5 million missing. Victor and I worked that scene all night, and around 9 in the morning I headed home. But at about 1 in the afternoon, my partner called and asked me to come back immediately. He didn't explain why, which surprised me. Victor met me at the gate, ushered me into the prosecutor's office without the usual paperwork, and took me straight to the duty room. On the table were fresh photographs of the murder in the private home, newly developed and printed. They clearly showed a bloodied axe lying in the middle of the room, directly under the chandelier. The axe head and handle were almost white. "Have you seen this?" Victor asked. Up until then, we'd always been formal with each other. "No," I replied, thinking to myself that they were playing some kind of trick on me. Then Victor pulled out the report and shoved it under my nose, telling me to read what had been seized. A lot of things had been taken from the scene: floor fragments with blood stains, glasses and a kettle, toothbrushes and clothing, wallpaper and bedding. But no axe. I called everyone who was there, my partner explained, and casually asked if they'd found the murder weapon. They all said no. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a joke. Victor and I headed back to the house. I remember it well: old, dull gray, with a tile roof, peeling paint on the window frames, and a rusty horseshoe nailed above the door. It was surrounded by an equally old garden. I don't know why, but while all the other trees were covered in snow, this garden greeted us with its crooked black branches. We broke the seal, stepped inside, and flipped the light switch. The chandelier lit up, but the axe was gone. For some reason, we didn't go any further. We milled about near the entrance, then turned around and went out for a smoke. Then the criminalist took out his camera and went back inside to take more pictures. I suggested Victor try taking a photo with his phone, and there it was again, the axe, clear as day. But our eyes couldn't see it. It was only when Victor handed me a plastic bag and put on rubber gloves, then slowly bent down and brought his hands together near the floor as if to pick up the axe, that's when it appeared. But it wasn't bright white like in the photos. It was gray, covered in some kind of film, as if it had lain under the snow all winter. Meanwhile, the suspect remembered nothing. He claimed he had gone to bed the previous evening and woken up in the hospital. He identified the victim. She was a woman he had left his wife for, his first love. He had divorced his wife and started a new life with this woman, and they had just begun to be happy when, up until his dying day, he was convinced that a corrupt prosecutor's office had framed him for someone else's crime and had no intention of finding the real killer. Apparently, he died in the hospital, a healthy man who had spent years hiking in the wilderness. His heart just stopped beating in his sleep. But I never confirmed it, and Victor and I never spoke of what happened again. An invisible victim story by a lieutenant colonel of police, an operative commissioner for especially important cases of one of the district directorates. On February 13, 1993, 32-year-old Aaron Barkley, the IBF super middleweight world champion, made his first title defense against undefeated 24-year-old James Toney, who was then ranked among the top 10 boxers in the world. After winning the middleweight championship against Tommy Hearns and losing it in the following fight against Roberto Duran, Barkley made 2 unsuccessful attempts to win titles in other divisions before moving up to light heavyweight. There, he won the championship by defeating Hearns again, but 2 months prior, he had won the title in the super middleweight division. Barkley chose not to defend his light heavyweight title, opting instead to fight James Toney. Toney, after winning the middleweight title and defending it successfully 6 times, vacated the title and moved up to the super middleweight division. Initially, Toney was favored 3-1, but by fight day the odds were nearly even, with most experts predicting a Barkley victory. With a significant size advantage, Barkley attempted to overpower his opponent from the start, but Toney responded immediately with a series of precise hits. The fight soon moved to the ropes, not because Barkley cornered his opponent, but because Toney was comfortable being there. In this less than ideal position, James appeared relaxed, working on counterattacks, then moved to the center to showcase his offensive skills. Barkley primarily targeted the body since going for Toney's head was extremely challenging. Toney, on the other hand, focused almost entirely on his opponent's head. In the 3rd round, Toney started to shine, displaying showmanship, impressive speed, outstanding counterattacking abilities, and high precision. In the 4th round, Barkley pressed forward, but Toney's speed posed significant problems for him, and James' excellent shoulder roll neutralized Barkley's powerful right hand. While Barkley managed to land some hits by the ropes, in the center of the ring, Toney gave him virtually no chance. James Toney was one of the best in boxing history at seamlessly transitioning between defense and offense. In the first minute of the 6th round, Barkley continued to press forward and genuinely cornered Toney, but James swiftly and skillfully halted his opponent's attacking momentum. After that, Toney again allowed himself to be pressed against the ropes, letting his opponent land accurate hits, mostly to the body, while not forgetting to counter. In this round, Barkley landed as many punches as Toney, but James still looked like the significantly more skilled boxer. For the first 2 minutes of the 7th round, Toney fought at half strength, then turned it up to full power. Barkley's situation worsened, and the problem was compounded by his closing left eye. In the 8th round, James Toney continued to box at his pleasure, essentially toying with the defending champion, who, to his credit, kept trying his best, though his strength was waning. Before the start of the 9th round, Barkley's trainer, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, himself a renowned boxer, asked his pupil to give everything he had left. Barkley went out and tried to fulfill his trainer's request, but it looked unconvincing. The fight's pattern did not change. Barkley continued to take numerous hits. At the end of the 9th round, Eddie Mustafa Muhammad told his boxer there was no point in continuing the fight in such a state. The doctor concurred. Barkley protested, but the doctor gave the command to the referee, and the fight was stopped. This bout was the last time Iran Barkley entered the ring as a reigning world champion. James Toney, on the other hand, became a world champion in a second weight category. It was his 8th championship fight in 21 months, meaning Toney fought for a title, on average, every 2.5 months. After this victory, he ranked 3rd in the world's best boxers list, behind Pernell Whitaker and the pound-for-pound leader Julio Cesar Chavez. Throughout his nearly 30-year career, James Toney had many spectacular fights, but the victory over Iran Barkley was probably his most brilliant performance.